Hello everyone! Earlier this month I took a look at Steel Division 2's beta, which primarily featured the battles, a few different divisions, some maps, modes and multiplayer. I really enjoyed it. The scale of the game, its realistic take and teamwork necessary in a multiplayer environment all really impressed me, very much as its predecessor, Steel Division Normandy 44 did. Now, I'd also said that if you're a newcomer to this franchise, both games basically play the same, with tweaks to the pacing of combat, the amount of units, and obviously the different divisions, because this is based on the Eastern Front. Now, I'm sure for die-hard fans of both games, or maybe the War Game series, that the differences feel much larger, but honestly, to me, the games are essentially going to be identical. However, what we didn't cover was the campaign. Now, this is where both games could not be more different. In Steel Division 44, the campaign was a series of battle missions with some objectives to represent some of the operations that took place on the Western Front. In Steel Division 2, you're in control of the operation on a campaign map. You can move divisions around the map, call in reinforcements, manage your supply and casualties, and fight out or auto-resolve the battles. It very much is a sort of World War II Total War game, just without the empire building. So let's break this all down and talk about how it plays and exactly what you do in the campaign. So as of right now, there's 4 campaigns in Steel Division 2 representing the opening days and weeks of Operation Bagration. The campaigns are displayed in chronological order, but their complexity are in the reverse order. So you can play the Orsha campaign first if you want to mirror the historical timeline, but it will be the trickiest and longest of the campaigns in terms of how many battles you'll be fighting. These campaigns can be played on either the Soviet side or the German side, with varying difficulty for each campaign, so there's a decent level of replayability in them. So, we'll start with the last campaign first, as it is the least complex, to give you an idea of what's going on. We're looking at the Barna Vici campaign, from July 3rd to July 9th. In this campaign, we're 10 days into Operation Bagration, and the German Army Group's center has been broken, and Minsk has been captured by the Soviets, or is about to be. The Germans have begun receiving reinforcements, and the Soviets are now starting to overextend their own supply lines. The goal of this campaign is for the Soviets to take Barna Vici and try to hold on to Stopchi, while the goal of the Germans is essentially the opposite. There's also a time limit. The campaign finishes on the 9th of July, and this means that there's 14 turns to complete the campaign. Now, 14 turns might not sound like a lot, and it isn't, but in any given turn, you could be fighting up to 10 battles if you really wanted to fight everything, so it could take a long time, and good planning is definitely rewarded. There isn't much room for error because of the time limit. Now, taking your objectives isn't the only way to win. You can also win by taking territory or destroying enough enemy units. These contribute to your victory scores, so they can help you win the campaign even if you technically didn't achieve your goals. Interestingly, in this campaign, the Germans gain 500 score for every turn that they hold Barna Vici, so even if you capture it on the last day available, and you took a lot of casualties doing it, it'd still maybe be seen as a defeat if you didn't have enough score. So let's talk movement. On turn start, your battalions will have a certain number of action points. They use these points to move around the map, and taking roads will be faster for both the motorized and the on-foot battalions. Now, interestingly, they've actually tried to best mirror the scale of movement one-to-one with real life, given the time frame involved. Battalions have an average kilometers per turn that they can travel, and individual battalions will cross different terrain at different speeds. For instance, it's much easier to get on-foot battalions through forested areas than armor, obviously, but armor really cranks up the speed on the roads. Typically, most battalions replenish 2/3 of their action points each turn, so if you want to keep your movement constant, keep traveling at 2/3 your max range. If you want to push the limits and gain ground, you can do that, but you kind of have to rest then. Or you can use the action points to do the opposite and fortify your area, which won't give you really much room to move at all. This digging in costs 2 action points and will have bunkers, trenches and lines of barbels on the battlefield for you. It also changes the game mode when attacked to being a breakthrough mode, which essentially gives the defender much more starting territory. So, how do battles kick off? Well, essentially when 2 battalions are in range, you can initiate a battle. With every battle, you can call in 2 additional battalions, so the biggest fights you can have are 3v3. The additional battalions can be controlled by AI if you wish, or entirely by you if you prefer. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The additional battalions that you can call in will be any available battalion that has the action points to arrive to the battle. So basically, anyone with the movement to get there can fight, but the less movement points they had, the later they will arrive in the battle. So Steel Division uses phases in battle A, B, and C, separated out by 10 minutes each. You'll see on your screen that the further the battalions are out, they'll be labelled as A, B or C to indicate when they'd arrive in the fight if they were chosen. This means that if you had some armour close by with barely any movement points, then they'd still arrive in the C phase, meaning you could be fighting for 20 minutes without those tanks. Or you could be fighting with only armour, waiting for infantry support to arrive if you did it the other way around. It creates really interesting situations and rewards good planning and a good spread of battalions all around the map. It's also a bit of a blind system, because you won't know what other 2 battalions the enemy might bring into the fight. They could have 6 battalions around them and they can choose any one of those 6, and they could always bring air support as well from the edge of the map. So you always know the initial battalion you're fighting, but you don't definitively know what the other 2 could be, unless there's only 2 around them. This again means that you need to have a varied approach to supporting your attack in order to help counter whatever they might bring. In terms of the air support that I mentioned, they're always an option to call into battle and listed as A phase, so unless you've totally wiped out the enemy air force, it's always a possibility that they might bring air into the fight. So generally speaking, I really like this system. It does create some weird scenarios where you're totally hard countered and essentially just can't do anything in the initial fight, but on reflection, that's probably only because I was learning the system. With good planning, this shouldn't really happen, and it hasn't really happened to me since. Different battalions also have unique capabilities. You can use bomber squadrons to bomb targets on the map before battle, or ground artillery to do the same if it's in range. This totally removes the action points of an enemy, essentially pinning them down. You can use fighters to hold a certain area with air superiority. If enemy aircraft try to support their ground troops, you'll then have auto-resolved air battles, but you can at least guarantee that no air support for the enemy on the ground that particular turn. You can also deploy AA guns that damage air units that come within their range, so there's quite a few tactical options when it comes to the campaign map's battalions, which just again really enhances the whole experience. After you've played some initial battles, you're probably going to start thinking about reinforcements. Now, unlike most kind of games like this, you don't actually replenish the troops in real time. Like I said, this takes place over the course of a week. They're going for this kind of one-to-one scale, so your troops don't really replenish, right? That doesn't really happen. Instead, new battalions will arrive at certain places in the map where you choose to. So just like regular battles, you have command points with an income rate. Each turn you earn these command points, and you can spend them on additional battalions. Now where the battalions come in on the map is then determined by the division that they're in. For instance, on Barna Vici as the Soviets, the 1st Mechanized Corps arrive on the south of the map at Urechchi. I don't know how to say it. Now presumably, they're being reinforced by the railway here. As you can see, also deploy them further east along the railway at Stary, and you can go further west if you end up pushing the Germans back at Slusk. This is interesting in and of itself because your divisions arrive from different locations, so if you want to link up the tank corps, who come in from Minsk in the north, you'd have to circle around or push through the German lines. Further to that, as the days go on, more reinforcements become available. The 1st Guard tank corps aren't available for 3 days into your campaign, as the Soviets were just liberating Minsk and establishing a supply line to the spearhead. This makes the campaign really feel grounded and each one feel different. You've got an entirely different map, different layout, divisions coming in at different places, and reinforcement locations. I mentioned supply a few times. Battalions push and pull on the border of the map as they advance, but if they get surrounded, the border collapses in on them and they get cut off from supply. If you're without supply for 1 turn, there's no penalty. 2 turns, and then only 50% of your action points will come back, and 4 turns, your battalion will rout and attempt to return to your territory, but can still be engaged and destroyed, and they don't fight back. However, if there's a nearby supplied battalion, they can still fight and try to save them. Often you'll come across groups of dug-in battalions at the front line, and it'll be better just to attempt to find a gap and go around them, cut them off and force them to either try and break out or rout them completely. This will essentially add a turn or 2 to achieve, but it's definitely a valid tactic for a particularly stubborn area. The goal primarily is just to take a location, not to fight every battle you can, and the only way you'll punch through an area is by winning a real major victory that wipes out most of the battalions there. Otherwise, they'll just fall back a few kilometers and you'll never really reach your objective in time. There's also 2 types of auto-resolve in this campaign. There's a general auto-resolve that determines the entire outcome, and a semi-auto-resolve that allows you to actually pick and choose what units the AI should fight with within its division. I've only played a campaign on medium difficulty so far, but I do think the auto-resolve is just a bit too forgiving. Just by testing it out, I was able to play an entire campaign with auto-resolve and win, though it felt a little bit cheesy. Now on higher difficulties, this doesn't seem to be the case. The auto-resolve seems to give you more casualties, so I think you thin out eventually. And that's basically it for this campaign, and pretty much everything you can do on it. Eugen did tease that it might potentially get a multiplayer mode so you could play against someone else, which I think would really enhance it, even though I did find the AI to be pretty good in general. My only AI complaint would be that it doesn't really defend the objective too well. With one turn to go, it moved all of its units off the objective, and I captured Barna Vici with a recon battalion, which just seemed a bit odd considering they still had a really big defense. Now apart from that, the AI does use a varied set of battalions and it does attempt to cut your supply, so I can't really fault it in that regard. They dig in when they should and they go aggressive when they need to. Makes sense. Overall, I think the campaign is really great, which is why I wanted to do a video highlighting it. I do think the time limits on it make it extremely challenging though. Like 14 turns really makes you rush hard, which I can understand I guess, but even if there was no enemies on the map, it still takes like 4 or 5 turns just to reach your objective. Combine that with trying to break through enemies, and it's a really tough challenge. I guess I just wish 1 or 2 of the campaigns were just a little bit more open-ended so that more dynamic things could happen, because I think with the time constraint, it's often the case that there's only going to be 1 or 2 solutions to getting that victory. The other main issues with the game is the lack of tutorial. Instead, there's just a text manual with some images to help you out, but it really doesn't have all the info, and it's not very an intuitive way of learning. I learned a bunch of things just by exploring the UI myself and seeing the AI do it a few turns in. I was like, oh, how do they do that? And I had to try and figure it out myself. Another issue that cropped up for me was that I played on the same map like 3 times in a row when streaming it, which granted I was roughly in the same area of the map, but even so, it was becoming really repetitive to have to fight what felt like the same battle several times in the campaign, so that's a bit of an issue as well. Now generally speaking, I think Steel Division 2 is quite a good game, however, I think Eugen Systems are stretching it a bit. They label themselves as an indie company, yet they charge for several editions of the game and have several day one DLC packages to buy. Now I normally wouldn't mind this too much, but it feels like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too with AAA style publishing when they lack certain basic features like tutorials, a decent UI, cutscenes or proper dialogue. Like the campaign missions are essentially just Google images with arrows drawn on them, and commander images are just kind of fairly awkwardly cut out. Now I'm not joking, but I could honestly make it better for them, probably for quite a cheap fee, to be honest, in a really short amount of time. It just doesn't seem to have that kind of polish to it. Now combine that with the fact that the game basically has no soundtrack, it just uses royalty-free music that it used, by the way, in the previous game. That does not sound like it should be from World War II, it's just some generic epic music kind of playlist kind of thing. And it kills the personality and it kills the quality of the game a bit. I mentioned this all because I do think the game is worth getting at some point. I want to support a smaller company, make something in this genre, and make something you can't really get anywhere else. But at the same time, I think they ask for a bit too much compared to what's on the market at the level that they're charging for, and with the DLCs and additions and things like that. So yeah, that's it for my review of Steel Division 2. Price is obviously subjective. Support companies if you want, I've got no qualms about it, but that's just my opinion on that matter. But I said it before and I would say it again, I recommend getting Steel Division Normandy 44 first. To me, if you haven't played both games, to me the games are basically the same. If you like that game, then go out and support this one. Steel Division 44 also provides you with some divisions for Steel Division 2, so you get to carry over some of that stuff, so it's not a total waste going off to a different game first. Now before I go, I want to remind you that if you want to get more involved with Republic of Play, we have a Discord for chatting and organizing multiplayer games. A few people in there playing Steel Division already. If you want to help support the channel, Patreon is a great way to help keep the lights on and help me do new things. At 100 patrons, I'll be doing some new kind of cool stuff that you can go check out. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook to never miss a video, and if you want to get games like Steel Division Normandy 44 for 85% off, you can use CEDA keys using the links in the description, which also helps me out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.